The first creature at Briarford Park to recognize Miss Verity Hale was not a person, but a wounded hound who should have bitten her. Yorkshire, 1856, lay under a pale morning mist when the carriages began arriving for Her Grace Octavia Vale's great hunting breakfast, and already the estate had taken on the strained glitter of a house preparing to judge a woman before she had opened her mouth. Silver was being polished in the breakfast room. Footmen hurried beneath trays of covered dishes. Grooms crossed the stable yard with bridles over their arms. In the eastern courtyard, the Westmere hounds shifted and breathed behind the kennel gates, a restless sea of white, brown, and black, as if they too knew that something false had been dressed for ceremony. Miss Verity Hale stood not at the centre of this splendour, but where she had learned to stand in every room that wanted beauty without inconvenience. Beside Lady Rosamund Eversley. Slightly behind her. Near enough to be useful, never near enough to be admired. Lady Rosamund was the daughter of the Earl of Penlee, with hair the colour of pale honey, a dowry large enough to soften any moral objection, and the calm confidence of a young woman who had never entered a room wondering whether she was welcome. Her travelling gown had been brushed until it held the soft gleam of expensive wool. Her gloves were new. Her ribbon for the morning's ceremonial presentation lay folded in a velvet box, blue as a winter sky, waiting to be tied before the Westmere hounds when Her Grace chose the proper moment. Verity carried that box. Her own gloves were doeskin, mended at the thumb and across the palm with stitches so small that only poverty would have noticed them. Her gown had once been grey-blue, though years of careful brushing had left it closer to rain. She was the daughter of a clergyman, educated enough to quote poetry, poor enough to be grateful for employment, and socially placed in that uncomfortable country where a woman was too gently born to be treated openly as a servant, yet too dependent to be treated fully as a guest. "Do hold the box straight, Verity," Lady Rosamund murmured as they crossed the hall. "Her Grace notices these things." "Of course," Verity said. Her voice was quiet, but not meek. Lady Rosamund smiled without looking at her. "You are fortunate, you know. Some women never see houses like this except from the servants' entrance." Verity kept her eyes on the long gallery ahead, where portraits of dead dukes watched the morning's preparations with painted suspicion. "Then I shall be careful to remember which door I came through." Rosamund's smile thinned, but before she could answer, Her Grace Octavia Vale, Dowager Duchess of Westmere, appeared at the head of the gallery. She was dressed in deep plum silk, upright as a church monument, with diamonds at her throat though it was not yet noon. In her presence, even the air seemed to arrange itself according to rank. "Lady Rosamund," she said, extending both hands. "My dear child, you are exactly the vision this house requires." Rosamund lowered herself in a graceful curtsy. "Your Grace is too kind." The Dowager's eyes moved to Verity with the cool efficiency of someone checking whether a chair had been placed correctly. "Miss Hale. I trust Lady Rosamund has everything she needs." "I believe so, Your Grace." "Belief is a fragile thing." "Be certain." The words were not loud. They did not need to be. A footman nearby lowered his eyes, and Verity felt the familiar heat of being corrected in front of people who would pretend not to have heard. She curtsied. "Yes, Your Grace." The Dowager turned back to Rosamund, her face softening by a full degree. "His Grace returns from the northern farms before breakfast. You will meet him in the courtyard when the hounds are brought out. Westmere men have always trusted their hounds. It is a pretty tradition, and a useful one." "I shall be honoured," Rosamund said. Verity heard what was not said. The hounds were not merely hounds today. They were part of a performance. The Duke of Westmere's mother had selected the woman she intended to make Duchess, and every guest under that roof had been invited to watch the house approve her. By luncheon, everyone would know. By dinner, everyone would speak of nothing else. By next week, London would whisper that Lady Rosamund Eversley had been received at Briarford Park as if the betrothal were already sealed. Verity was still holding the velvet box when a small crash sounded from the corridor leading toward the service passage. A stable boy of no more than 12 stood frozen beside an overturned basket of folded linen, his face drained of colour. A silverback brush had skidded across the floor and come to rest near Lady Rosamund's slipper. "Clumsy little creature," Rosamund said softly. The boy bent at once, hands trembling. Verity saw the Dowager turn. She saw, too, the housekeeper's expression tighten from the far end of the hall. One more mistake on a morning like this could cost a boy his place. Verity stepped forward before she had time to consider whether she should. "Forgive me," she said, lowering herself to gather the linen. "The fault was mine. I turned too quickly and startled him." The boy looked at her, startled in truth now. "Miss, you were carrying more than any sensible person should have given you," Verity said, under her breath, with a quick glance that warned him to be silent. Then, louder, she added, "There is no harm done." Lady Rosamund watched her with mild distaste. The Dowager watched with something sharper. "You are generous with blame, Miss Hale." Verity placed the last folded cloth back in the basket. "Only when blame is inexpensive, Your Grace." For the first time, Her Grace looked at her as if she had spoken in a language not listed among her accomplishments. Then the moment passed. "See that it remains so." The boy escaped down the passage with the basket hugged to his chest. Verity returned to Lady Rosamund's side, her pulse steady only because she had trained it for years to obey her. Rosamund leaned close. "You should not make little scenes, Verity. People may begin to think you want attention." "There are kinder things to want," Verity said. Rosamund laughed softly. "Kindness is useful in poor rooms. In great houses, one requires judgment." That evening, after the guests had dressed for dinner and the great rooms had filled with candlelight, Verity found herself dismissed from Rosamund's immediate service with a wave of one jeweled hand. "Leave the ribbon box in my chamber," Rosamund said. "And do try not to look so solemn tomorrow. Her Grace dislikes melancholy women." Verity did as she was told. She ate her supper in a small side room with an elderly cousin, a governess attached to one of the visiting families, and a companion who spoke only of drafts. By the time she escaped into the corridor, the house had settled into the muffled after-dinner hush of a great estate. Voices drifted from the drawing room. Laughter rose, polished and easy, then disappeared behind oak doors. Verity meant to return to her room. She truly did. Then she heard the sound. It came from beyond the service stair and through a passage that led toward the yard. A low, broken whine. Not loud. Not dramatic. Only pain trying not to be noticed. Verity stopped. Another whine followed, and this one caught under her ribs. She had been told all her life not to intrude where she was not wanted. She had also been raised by a father who once spent half a winter feeding a lame dog behind the church because, he had said, mercy became shabby if practiced only when convenient. Verity took a candle from the wall sconce and followed the sound. The night air struck cold when she opened the side door. Across the yard, the kennels lay silvered by moonlight, the hounds shifting within their enclosure. Most lifted their heads as she approached. One did not. He lay near the gate, a broad, handsome animal with one dark ear and eyes too intelligent for comfort. Bracken. She knew his name because the grooms had spoken of him that afternoon as the pride of the Westmere pack. Now his flank trembled when he breathed. "Easy," Verity whispered. "I'm not here to trouble you." Bracken's lips lifted at first, not in threat so much as fear. Verity stopped 6 feet from the gate and lowered herself slowly to the ground. Her gown brushed damp stone. "There now. You don't have to trust me quickly." The hound watched her. Somewhere beyond the stable wall, a door closed. At that small crack of sound, Bracken shuddered and turned his head sharply toward the shadows. Verity saw then what had troubled her. A thin mark beneath the coat near his shoulder, half hidden, not bleeding now but raw enough to speak of recent pain. Her hand went to her glove. She had a small tin of salve in her pocket, kept from habit more than expectation. Rosamund mocked her for such things. Verity had found that mockery rarely mattered to a blister, a scraped hand, or a creature too frightened to ask for help. "I shall not touch you unless you allow it," she murmured. She drew off her right glove, then paused and put it back on. The old doeskin was softer than her bare fingers in the cold, and it carried the faint scent of lavender soap, beeswax, and the salve she had used on every small hurt poverty had required her to mend herself. She extended her hand through the gate. Bracken did not move. Verity waited. Her knees began to ache against the stone. Her candle guttered once in the wind. At last, the hound leaned forward and touched his nose to the mended seam across her palm. The trust was so small that it almost broke her. "That's it," she whispered. "You're very brave." She opened the tin with one careful hand and worked the salve into the mark as gently as she could. Bracken trembled, then stilled. One by one, the other hounds quieted behind him, as if her silence had passed through the pack like a hand laid over restless water. Verity did not know that a man had entered the far edge of the yard and stopped beneath the archway. His Grace Adrian Vale, Duke of Westmere, had returned later than expected, his coat still marked by road dust from the northern farms, his black riding gloves held in one hand. He had come toward the kennels because the hounds were uneasy and because, unlike most people in his mother's house, animals did not flatter him when they lied. He saw the woman kneeling in the moonlight. He saw Bracken, who refused even experienced hands when in pain, lower his head beneath her mended glove. He saw her lean close, not possessive, not afraid, only patient. Then a sharper sound cut the yard. The light tap of a riding crop against stone. Verity turned. Bracken jerked beneath her hand and gave a low growl toward the darkness beyond the stable corner. A woman's laugh floated faintly from that direction, bright and careless, then faded. Verity froze. Adrian did not move. The hound pressed closer to the gate, not toward the sound, but toward her. Verity closed the tin, slipped it into her pocket, and whispered, "I heard it too." Behind the archway, the Duke of Westmere stood very still. By morning, his mother would present him with the bride she had chosen. But in the moonlit kennel yard, his hounds had already begun telling him the truth. By breakfast, the hound that had trembled under Verity Hale's hand was standing at the kennel gate as if he had kept a secret through the night and disliked the weight of it. Bracken's dark ear twitched whenever footsteps crossed the stones, and each time the sound sharpened into the light tap of a lady's riding crop, his whole body stiffened. Verity saw it from the far end of the courtyard, where she stood with Lady Rosamund's velvet ribbon box pressed between her gloved hands. She had slept little. The smell of beeswax salve still clung faintly to the mended seam of her right glove, and more than once she had folded that hand into her skirts as if the evidence of tenderness could be mistaken for presumption. No one had spoken of the kennel yard. No one had asked why one of the Westmere hounds looked calmer than he had the evening before. Yet Verity could not free herself from the memory of the tall figure beneath the archway, half-shadowed, silent, and unmistakably watching. His Grace Adrian Vale had not stepped forward. He had not accused. He had not thanked her. He had simply stood there with the stillness of a man who trusted observation more than speech. That made him more dangerous, not less. Men who spoke too quickly could be answered. Men who watched carried questions away and sharpened them in private. "You are holding that box as though it contains funeral ashes," Lady Rosamund said beside her. "Do try to look less tragic. It is a hunting breakfast, not a sermon." Verity adjusted her grip. "I shall endeavour not to depress the hounds." Rosamund gave a small laugh, bright enough for anyone nearby to mistake it for affection. "Oh, you need not concern yourself with the hounds. They respond to breeding, command, and confidence. Rather like people." She lifted her ivory-handled crop and tapped it twice against her skirt. The sound was delicate, almost musical. Bracken recoiled at the gate. Verity's gaze flew to him before she could stop herself. Rosamund noticed. Her pale brows rose. "You are very interested in the kennels this morning." "They are difficult not to hear," Verity said. "Everything at Briarford is difficult not to hear when one is placed behind it." The word slipped out more honestly than she intended. Rosamund's smile cooled. "Be careful, Verity. Wit is charming in women who can afford it. In women who cannot, it is often called ingratitude." Before Verity could answer, the house doors opened and her Grace Octavia Vale descended the shallow steps with the measured assurance of a woman who believed even morning light should fall according to rank. She wore dark green silk beneath a fur-trimmed mantle, and the pearls at her ears glowed against her severe profile. Several guests followed her, wrapped in shawls and hunting coats, their laughter still soft from the warmth of the breakfast room. They arranged themselves as naturally as birds on a wire, titled ladies nearest the dowager, lesser relations to the edges, unmarried women where ambition and hope could be displayed without appearing vulgar. Verity moved, out of long habit, half a pace behind Rosamund. The dowager's eyes found her and approved only the distance. "Lady Rosamund," her Grace said, taking Rosamund's hands. "You look precisely as I hoped. Your Grace is generous, Rosamund replied. No. I am exact. The Dowager turned slightly, allowing the nearest guests to hear. There are houses that require prettiness. There are houses that require money. Briarford requires steadiness, lineage, and the ability to be seen without begging to be admired. Rosamund lowered her lashes in a practiced gesture of modesty. A viscountess murmured that the description could hardly be improved. An elderly baronet's wife whispered that Penley blood had always married well. Verity stood behind the velvet box and looked toward the kennels. Bracken had not taken his eyes from the crop. Miss Hale, the Dowager said abruptly. Verity curtsied. Your Grace. The ribbon. Verity opened the box. Inside lay the ceremonial strip of blue silk, brushed smooth and folded around a small silver clasp engraved with the Vale crest. Rosamund reached for it, then paused with her hand suspended so that everyone might notice the grace of her fingers. The color is exquisite. Westmere blue, the Dowager said. It has been worn by every duchess presented to the Hounds since my husband's grandmother kept the tradition alive. The words moved through the guests with a soft and eager rustle. Duchess. Tradition. Presented. Nothing formal had been announced, but the meaning was placed as carefully as a jewel on velvet. Verity felt the moment settle around Rosamund like a crown being tested for fit. Miss Hale, Rosamund said, not looking at her. The clasp is not straight. Verity stepped nearer and adjusted the silver catch. A little to the left, Rosamund murmured. Verity shifted it. No, not that far. Really, you have such solemn hands. A few women smiled. Not cruelly, perhaps. Worse. Idly. Verity kept her face composed. The Dowager watched without interruption, as if Verity's usefulness lay partly in the contrast she provided. Rosamund shone more brightly when another woman was made dull beside her. There, Verity said. It is straight now. How comforting, Rosamund replied. I do depend on you for small corrections. Small things often prevent larger embarrassments, Verity said. The Dowager's gaze sharpened. Rosamund turned her head slowly, still smiling. Some women are safest when no one chooses them. The words were soft. They were meant for Verity alone, yet a sudden quiet in the courtyard carried them farther than Rosamund intended. At the edge of the stable arch, His Grace Adrian Vale had appeared. He had returned to the estate in riding clothes the color of storm dark wool, his black hair wind-touched, his expression unreadable. He was not handsome in the easy, flattering way that young ladies praised over tea. His face was too controlled for that, his jaw too stern, his eyes too intent. He looked like a man carved by duty and left unfinished by tenderness. The guests straightened. The Dowager's shoulders eased, but only slightly. Westmere, she said. At last. Adrian crossed the courtyard with unhurried steps. No one moved into his path. Even the hound seemed to register his presence differently. Their restlessness tightened into attention, though Bracken remained fixed near the gate, his gaze shifting between Verity's gloved hand and Rosamund's crop. Mother, Adrian said. He bowed over the Dowager's hand, then turned to Rosamund. Lady Rosamund. Your Grace. Rosamund curtsied with perfect depth. I hope the northern farms did not keep you from us too cruelly. They kept me usefully. His eyes moved to the ribbon, then to the box, then to Verity. And you are? The courtyard seemed to hold its breath for a moment. It was not that no one knew Verity's name. It was that no one important had asked for it as though the answer mattered. Miss Verity Hale, Your Grace, she said. Lady Rosamund's companion. Miss Hale. He said it once, clearly, without turning it into an apology for having asked. You were in the kennel yard last night. A faint ripple moved through the nearest guests. Rosamund's hand tightened around the ribbon. The Dowager became very still. Verity felt the old instinct rise, the one that urged explanation before accusation could form. She resisted it. Yes, Your Grace. Why? His tone was not harsh, but it had the weight of command. Verity looked toward Bracken. One of your hounds was distressed. And you considered yourself qualified to tend him. No, she said. I considered him distressed. Something moved in Adrian's face. It was not quite approval. It was attention deepening. Rosamund laughed lightly, though the sound did not reach her eyes. Miss Hale is tender-hearted. It is one of her more inconvenient virtues. She would bandage a chair leg if it appeared lonely. Would she? Adrian asked. Verity heard the question beneath the question. Lady Rosamund heard it too, and her smile sharpened by a fraction. The dowager stepped smoothly into the pause. Miss Hale has a clergyman's daughter's habit of making herself useful. Admirable in its place. But today is not about minor accidents in the yard. Today is about the house, the hounds, and the future of Briarford. Is it? Adrian said. You have made a great deal of progress before I have had breakfast. A few guests gave cautious smiles, uncertain whether the Duke had made a joke or issued a warning. The dowager did not smile. A house cannot wait forever for its master to notice what must be done. I notice a great deal. His eyes went to the kennel gate as Rosamund stepped forward with the ribbon. The hounds shifted. Bracken backed one pace. Pritchard, the kennel master, murmured low commands through the bars, his weathered face tense with concentration. They are lively this morning, Rosamund said, lifting her chin. Healthy spirits, I suppose. She tapped the crop once against her boot. Bracken flinched so sharply that the silver clasp slipped in Verity's hand and chimed against the velvet box. Adrian heard it. Everyone heard it. Rosamund turned a little too quickly. Do take care, Verity. Verity closed the box more firmly. Yes, Lady Rosamund. Adrian looked from the hound to the crop, then to Verity's mended glove. He said nothing. That silence was worse for Rosamund than any accusation could have been. The dowager raised her voice with polished brightness. Come, my dear. The guests are waiting to see you presented. Rosamund's smile returned, perfect and pale. She moved toward the kennel gate with Westmere blue in her hands and all of Briarford watching. Behind her, Verity remained where she had been placed. Behind. Never before. But Bracken was no longer looking at Rosamund. The hound's eyes were fixed on the mended glove at Verity's side, and the Duke of Westmere was watching the same thing. Lady Rosamund Eversley took 3 graceful steps toward the kennel gate, and the whole courtyard seemed to lean after her, hungry for a picture that could be carried back to London in whispers. Her Grace Octavia Vale stood near the stone steps with one hand folded over the other, every inch the Dowager Duchess who had arranged not merely a breakfast, but a verdict. The guests had arranged themselves in a bright half-circle around the open yard. There were ladies wrapped in shawls, gentlemen with polished boots, a rector from the nearby parish, several local gentry families, and enough senior servants at the edges to ensure that by nightfall the entire estate would know what had occurred. The silver breakfast urns gleamed on long tables beneath the portico. Warm bread, game pies, marmalade, and fruit had been laid out with aristocratic abundance, but no one was looking at the food now. They were looking at Lady Rosamund, at the Westmere blue ribbon in her hands, and at the pack of hounds who waited behind the bars with a silence that did not feel obedient. Verity Hale remained 2 steps behind, holding the empty velvet box against her waist. It was a position she knew so well that her body found it without instruction. Behind the chosen woman. Behind the silk, the dowry, the name, the smile. The air smelled of damp stone, horse leather, cold grass, and the faint beeswax salve still caught in the seam of Verity's glove. She curled her fingers inward, wishing the scent away and yet unable to regret it. Bracken stood nearest the gate. His dark ear lifted. His eyes were not on Rosamund's face. They were on the ivory-handled crop hanging from her wrist. Pritchard, the dowager said, with a brightness that cut through the quiet. Bring Bracken forward. Lady Rosamund must not be kept waiting. The kennel master bowed, though his weathered face held a strain that even distance could not hide. Yes, Your Grace. He opened the inner latch and gave a low command. 2 grooms steadied the pack. The hounds shifted, not wildly, but as if a current had moved beneath them. Bracken came forward 1 pace, then stopped. Good boy, Rosamund said, her smile widening for the guests. Come now. Don't be shy. She extended the ribbon. At the soft movement of the crop against her sleeve, Bracken drew back. The pack behind him tightened. A low sound moved through the hounds, not a single growl but many, layered beneath one another, warning and fear woven together. The nearest ladies gasped. A gentleman laughed once, too loudly, then stopped when no one joined him. Pritchard murmured again. "Steady, Bracken. Steady now." Rosamund's face held its shape, but colour rose beneath her skin. She looked quickly toward the Dowager, then toward Adrian. The Duke of Westmere stood several feet from the kennel gate, gloved hands at his sides, his gaze fixed not on the spectacle his mother had arranged, but on the hound who refused it. "Perhaps he is unsettled by the crowd," Rosamund said. "Animals can be so foolish when too many people admire them." She moved closer. Bracken retreated until his shoulder touched the gatepost. The sound from the pack deepened. No hound lunged. No tooth met flesh. Yet the refusal was so complete that it might as well have been spoken in English. Rosamund's smile began to harden. "Pritchard, control them." The kennel master's mouth tightened. "They are controlled, my lady. They are embarrassing me." The words were soft enough that only those nearest could hear, but Verity heard them. So did Adrian. His eye shifted to Rosamund with a stillness that made her look away. The Dowager took one measured step forward. "The ribbon, Lady Rosamund." "Try again." Rosamund lifted her chin. "Of course." She reached through the gate, this time with more determination than grace. The ribbon's silver clasp flashed. Bracken turned his head away sharply, and the movement startled Rosamund enough that the blue silk slipped from her fingers. It fell through the bars, fluttered once, and landed on the damp stones between the gate and Verity's hem. Silence struck the courtyard. Verity did not move at first. She knew better than to insert herself into the center of a noble humiliation. She knew the danger of being useful at the wrong moment. But a groom stepped forward with his boot raised, not seeing the ribbon beneath him, and Verity acted before caution could stop her. She bent, gathered the blue silk in her mended glove, and rose with the clasp resting in her palm. "Forgive me," she said quietly. "It would have been marked." No one answered. The silence had changed. Bracken had lifted his head. The other hounds had gone still. Verity felt it before she understood it, the sudden focus of living creatures turning toward her as if a sound had been made that only they could hear. Bracken moved to the bars. His nose touched the seam across her glove. His tail gave one uncertain sweep. Then, with a soft breath, he lowered himself until his chest met the stone. Behind him, one hound followed. Then another. Within moments, the restless pack had quieted into a ring of watchful bodies, each one facing the woman no one had meant to present. A whisper ran through the guests. It did not rise all at once. It shivered outward from the nearest ladies to the gentlemen behind them, from the portico to the servants by the wall. Good heavens! Miss Hale! How extraordinary! They know her. Verity's throat tightened. She had never feared animals the way she feared drawing rooms, yet she found herself unable to step back. Bracken's eyes remained on her glove with an expression that felt less like obedience than memory. "Do not stand there gawking," Rosamund said. She reached for the ribbon. "Give it to me." Verity extended it at once. Rosamund snatched the blue silk from her hand, and at the quick motion, Bracken rose halfway with a warning rumble. The pack stirred again. Rosamund froze. For one unguarded second, her face showed not charm, not modesty, but anger. Then she turned toward the guests with a brittle laugh. "It seems Miss Hale has been making friends in places beneath her station." The words landed exactly where she aimed them. Several eyes moved to Verity's worn gown, her old gloves, the plainness of her bonnet. Verity felt the familiar social blade slip under her ribs. Beneath her station. Beneath notice. Beneath consequence. She lowered her gaze, but not her head. Adrian moved before his mother could speak. It was only 2 steps, yet the courtyard seemed to make room for them. "No one will punish the hounds," he said. His voice was low, but it carried. "And no one will punish my servants for an animal's unease." Rosamund's smile faltered. Your Grace, surely you see that something has made them behave so. I do. The answer was calm. Too calm. The Dowager's expression sharpened. Westmere, this is hardly the moment for severity. Lady Rosamund has been humiliated in front of half the county. I noticed. Then you will have Pritchard answer for it. Adrian looked at the kennel master. The man stood rigid, as if expecting dismissal. Then the Duke turned back to his mother. Pritchard will answer my questions when I have them. Until then, no groom, no keeper, no hound, and no guest under this roof is to be used as a convenient explanation. The words passed through the courtyard like cold air through candle flame. Verity lifted her eyes despite herself. Adrian was not looking at the Dowager now. He was looking at Rosamund's crop. Then at Bracken's shoulder. Then at Verity's glove. Each glance was brief. Each one mattered. Lady Rosamund laughed again, but this time the sound had lost its ease. How very dramatic, Your Grace. I only meant that the creature has been poorly managed. Bracken's ears flattened at the word creature. Verity's hand tightened around the empty velvet box. Adrian saw that too. Miss Hale, he said. The sound of her name in his voice caused every whisper to stop. Verity curtsied because she did not know what else to do. Your Grace. You were near the kennels last night. The Dowager's eyes flashed toward her. Rosamund went very still. Verity felt all the guests turn, eager now, not for a bride's presentation, but for a scandal. She could deny nothing. The salve was in her glove. Bracken had already told the truth in the only language he possessed. Yes, Your Grace. Why? The same question as before. But this time he asked it in public. This time, his tone held no accusation, only intent. Verity breathed once. Because Bracken was distressed. A murmur rose again. Rosamund's lips parted. You see? She admits it. She has been handling them secretly. Verity turned to her, not quickly, not sharply, but with a stillness that surprised even herself. I touched one wounded hound, my lady. I did not command a pack. The courtyard went silent. Rosamund's cheeks coloured. The Dowager drew herself taller. Miss Hale, she said, each syllable polished with ice, you will explain why my son's hounds know you better than they know his intended bride. Bracken, as if in answer, lowered his head once more toward Verity's mended glove. Adrian watched the movement. His face revealed almost nothing. But something had changed in him. Verity could feel it as clearly as the cold stone beneath her feet. The morning had been arranged to reveal Lady Rosamund as the future of Briarford. Instead, the hounds had dragged a hidden truth into daylight, and every person in the courtyard now stood waiting to see who would dare name it first. The morning room at Briarford Park had been designed for comfort, yet Verity Hale had never felt less sheltered than she did standing beside its pale marble hearth with half the county's whispers pressed against the closed door behind her. The hunting breakfast had ended without ending. Guests had gone indoors with their plates unfinished and their curiosity sharpened. Servants had lowered their eyes with the strained obedience of people who knew a mistake had occurred above their station, which meant someone below it might be made to pay. Her Grace Octavia Vale had withdrawn with Lady Rosamund on her arm, speaking in a tone too controlled to be called anger. His Grace Adrian Vale had said only, Miss Hale, a word. Now the Duke stood near the windows, the grey Yorkshire light cutting his face into planes of restraint. The door to the corridor remained partly open. Mrs. Vale, the housekeeper, stood within sight beyond it, her hands folded at her waist, present enough to preserve propriety and distant enough to make clear she would not rescue anyone from discomfort. Verity appreciated the courtesy. She would have appreciated trust more. Adrian did not sit. Neither did she. Between them lay a small table set with untouched tea, a plate of thin bread and butter, and the empty velvet box that had held the Westmere blue ribbon. Somehow that box looked more accusing than any person in the room. You understand why I must ask, Adrian said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a man accustomed to answers arriving promptly. Verity kept her gloved hand still. I understand why many people will ask, Your Grace. That is not what I said. No, she met his eyes. It is what I heard. He studied her for a moment. He was not handsome when he looked at a person this way. Handsome implied ease. His attention had none. It was exact, almost severe, and for one strange second Verity understood why the household seemed to hold its breath around him. He did not waste his authority. That made it more difficult to bear when he turned it upon her. "Did you feed the hounds before the breakfast?" he asked. "No, Your Grace." "Did you enter the kennels at any point before last night?" "No." "Did you give Bracken anything that might have made him seek your hand this morning?" Verity felt the words close around her like a snare made of politeness. There it was. Not accusation, precisely. Something colder. Possibility. "I gave him salve for a sore place," she said. "Nothing else?" "Was that salve scented?" "Faintly. Lavender and beeswax." "It is what I had." His gaze moved to her right glove. She resisted the instinct to hide it. "And you wore that glove?" "Yes." "Then the hound might have recognized the scent." "Yes." The answer cost her more than denial would have. Truth sometimes handed a weapon to the person who had asked for it. Adrian's expression did not change. "And the pack?" "I cannot answer for the pack." "You were not distressed when they came toward you?" "I was very distressed." "You did not appear so." Something in her chest tightened. She had been told all her life that composure was a virtue, until composure became evidence that she did not feel enough. She folded her fingers once, slowly, within the old doeskin. "Your Grace, I have been invisible too long to confuse humiliation with opportunity." The room changed after that. Not visibly. The clock still ticked on the mantel. Mrs. Vale still stood in the corridor. Sunlight still lay in a pale strip across the carpet. But Adrian's attention shifted, as if her words had struck some hidden panel in him and opened a narrower chamber. "You believe I have humiliated you." "I believe the courtyard did." "You merely asked the question everyone else was too well-bred to ask aloud." His jaw tightened. "I am trying to determine whether the scene was arranged." "Then ask who had reason to arrange it." "I am asking the woman the hounds chose." Heat rose to her face, but she did not look away. "They did not choose me, Your Grace. They remembered kindness. There is a difference, though it appears to have inconvenienced your mother's plans." For the first time, something almost human broke through his control. Not amusement. Not admiration. Surprise. Then the door opened wider without a knock, and Lady Rosamund Eversley stepped into the room as if every threshold at Briarford had been built for her arrival. Her gown had been changed since the courtyard. The new one was pale rose, soft enough to suggest injury without admitting defeat. Her eyes shone with a brightness too deliberate to be tears. Behind her came the faint scent of expensive perfume, clean and floral, sharp at the edges. "Forgive me, Your Grace," she said. "I was told Miss Hale was here, and I could not allow the matter to continue without speaking." Verity curtsied because rank demanded it, not because her body wished to bend. "Lady Rosamund." Rosamund did not look at her. "Your Grace, I am not vindictive. Everyone who knows me will say so. But what occurred this morning was not a small embarrassment. I was placed before your household, your guests, your neighbors, and made to appear ridiculous by a pack of animals that had plainly been encouraged elsewhere." Adrian's gaze remained steady. "Plainly? What else can one call it?" Rosamund turned then, and her eyes rested on Verity with soft sorrow. Verity has always possessed a tender manner with lesser creatures. It is often admirable. But tenderness can become hunger when a woman has been overlooked too often. Verity felt the blow land exactly where Rosamund intended. It was not crude enough to be challenged easily. That was Rosamund's gift. She could bruise without raising her voice. "My lady," Verity said, "if I had desired attention, I would have chosen a method less likely to make everyone pity you." Rosamund's mouth parted. Adrian looked sharply at Verity, but she did not regret the words. Dignity did not always require silence. Sometimes silence merely dressed surrender in good manners. Rosamund recovered quickly. "You see, Your Grace? She is not the meek little companion she pretends to be." "I have not found Miss Hale meek," Adrian said. Rosamund stilled. The answer had not been defense, but it was not agreement. That made it dangerous. Then you will at least require her to apologize, she said. Publicly. At dinner, perhaps. It need not be cruel. She may say she acted foolishly, that her interest in the hounds was excessive, and that she regrets the confusion. No, Verity said. The word left her before fear could soften it. Rosamund looked at her as though a chair had spoken. I beg your pardon. Verity turned fully toward her. I will apologize for causing distress if I have done so. I will apologize for stepping where I was not wanted. I will even apologize for failing to understand how quickly a useful woman becomes a suspicious one. But I will not apologize for noticing that an animal was in pain. I won't make cruelty more comfortable by pretending kindness was the offense. The silence that followed was deep enough to hear Mrs. Vale shift in the corridor. Rosamund's face lost color. Adrian's eyes did not leave Verity. She wished, absurdly, that he would look away. Being ignored had been easier than being seen at the exact moment one's heart stood uncovered. That is quite a speech, Rosamund said at last. A little theatrical for a clergyman's daughter. My father taught me sermons should be brief. Adrian moved then, not toward Verity, but between the two women by the width of a single step. It was not dramatic. It was unmistakable. There will be no public apology today. Rosamund's eyes flashed. Your Grace. Not until I know what happened. You cannot mean to place my word beneath hers. I mean to place fact above convenience. The word struck the room cleanly. Rosamund curtsied, too low and too cold. How reassuring for Miss Hale. She turned and left without waiting for dismissal, her perfume lingering after her like a polished accusation. Verity remained still until the sound of Rosamund's steps faded down the corridor. Only then did she realize her hands were trembling inside her gloves. Adrian saw. His expression changed in the smallest possible way. Miss Hale. Please do not, she said. He paused. Do not what? Do not speak kindly now if you are still deciding whether I am dishonest. I would rather have the wound clean. The words were too honest. She knew it at once. Yet Adrian did not rebuke her. He looked down at the velvet box, then back at her glove. I asked the wrong question. Her breath caught before she could prevent it. Perhaps you asked the question a duke must ask. That does not make it the right one. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then footsteps sounded outside, heavier this time. Pritchard appeared beyond the open door, cap in his hands, his face grave. Your Grace. Adrian turned. What is it? The kennel master glanced at Verity, then at the housekeeper, as if measuring how much truth the room could bear. It is Bracken, Your Grace. I checked him proper, as you ordered. Adrian's body went very still. And? Pritchard swallowed. There is a thin mark under the coat near his shoulder. I missed the worst of it yesterday. Verity felt the room tilt around the image of Bracken lowering his head to her hand. Adrian's voice was quiet. From Bramble. Pritchard shook his head once. No, Your Grace. That was not made by any branch. Adrian Vale did not ask Pritchard to repeat himself. Men repeated things when they hoped the second hearing would make them less true, and he had no patience for comfort disguised as delay. Within 10 minutes, the Duke of Westmere was back in the kennel yard with the grey morning drawn tight around him, Pritchard at his side, and Bracken standing near the inner gate with a dignity that seemed almost human. Verity had not been asked to come. She had followed only as far as the side passage because Mrs. Vale had touched her sleeve and said quietly, His Grace may wish to know which salve you used. That was not an invitation. It was not a dismissal either. It left Verity in the narrowest possible place, which was where life had put her most often. She stood just beyond the open door to the yard, close enough to hear, far enough to be denied if anyone chose to deny her. Adrian crouched before Bracken with none of the impatience one might expect from a man born to command people instead of soothe animals. He did not reach at once. He let the hound scent his hand, then nodded to Pritchard. The kennel master parted the coat near Bracken's shoulder with blunt, careful fingers. The mark was thin and pale against the skin, not dramatic enough to shock the crowd that had gasped in the courtyard, but clear enough to alter the meaning of the morning. Verity pressed her mended glove against her skirt. Pain did not need to be large to be real. Not a branch, Adrian said. It was not a question. No, Your Grace, Pritchard answered. Too clean. Too narrow. A strap? Perhaps. Pritchard hesitated. Or a crop, if it caught him wrong. Bracken's ear flicked at the word. Adrian saw it. Verity saw Adrian see it. That small chain of noticing tightened the air more than any accusation could have done. Who came near the kennels yesterday? Adrian asked. Grooms, boys, myself. Mr. Latham from the stables passed twice. Miss Hale came after dark. Pritchard glanced toward Verity and coloured. Begging your pardon, miss. You have nothing to beg pardon for, Verity said before she could stop herself. Adrian looked over his shoulder at her. His gaze was not soft, but it was no longer the same gaze that had questioned her in the morning room. And before dark, he asked Pritchard. Pritchard shifted his cap between his hands. There was a lady near the east gate after luncheon. I did not see her face plain. She wore a riding habit. Blue. Fine cloth. Verity felt her breath still. Lady Rosamund had worn blue yesterday. Westmere blue, she had called it, though she had not yet earned the right to anything of Westmere except hospitality. Adrian's face remained unreadable. Did she carry anything? Pritchard looked miserable. A crop, Your Grace. Ivory handle, I think. I cannot swear it. You will not swear what you cannot know. No, Your Grace. The answer seemed to steady the man. Adrian stood. Show me the gate. They crossed the yard to the side entrance used by grooms and keepers. The latch was old iron, dark with use. A strip of fabric had caught on a splintered edge of the wood near the lower hinge, no larger than Verity's thumbnail. Pritchard bent and freed it carefully. Blue. Not the deep clean blue of untouched ribbon, but a torn thread from fine wool, damp at the edge from morning mist. Adrian took it between two fingers. Verity remembered Rosamund tapping the ivory crop against her skirt. She remembered Bracken recoiling before the ceremonial ribbon ever touched him. She remembered the laugh in the darkness. Bright. Careless. Already fading when pain remained behind. Your Grace, Pritchard said, his voice low, if I had known there was hurt, I would have sent word. I know. The words were brief, but they carried enough trust to make the kennel master straighten. Adrian turned toward the doorway. Miss Hale. Verity stepped into the yard because not doing so would look like guilt. Your Grace. You said you used salve. Yes. Do you have it? She drew the small tin from her pocket and placed it in his hand. His fingers did not brush hers. Somehow the restraint felt more intimate than touch would have. He opened the lid and smelled lavender and beeswax. This is all. A little rosemary oil. My father used it for cracked hands after winter burials. The moment the words left her mouth, she wished them back. They made her sound poor, sentimental, useful. But Adrian only closed the tin and returned it. Thank you. Such a small phrase. It should not have unsettled her. I did not do anything remarkable, she said. No, he replied. You did something inconvenient. That is often rarer. Before Verity could answer, a footman appeared at the archway, breathless from trying not to run. Your Grace, Her Grace asks that Miss Hale attend the drawing-room. Lady Rosamund is with her. The footman looked at Verity with pity that he tried to hide and failed. Adrian's jaw hardened. I asked no one to summon Miss Hale. No, Your Grace. Yet she has been summoned. Yes, Your Grace. Verity lifted her chin before the Duke could refuse on her behalf. If she were absent, the story would be told over her like a cloth thrown across furniture. I will go. Adrian looked at her, and for the first time she saw conflict in him that did not belong to duty alone. You need not submit to being displayed. I suspect I have already been displayed. I would rather be present when they decide what I am. He held her gaze for a heartbeat. Then he said to the footman, "Tell her Grace we are coming." The drawing-room was full enough to be accidental and arranged enough to be deliberate. Several ladies sat with embroidery they were not using. A pair of gentlemen stood near the mantel, speaking too softly. The dowager occupied the central sofa like a judge carved from silk, while Lady Rosamund sat beside her in pale rose, wounded innocence restored and polished. When Verity entered, conversation thinned to threads. Adrian came in behind her. The thinning stopped entirely. Her Grace looked at him, then at Verity. "Westmere. I asked for Miss Hale. And she is here. I did not ask for an escort. She is under my roof." A faint change passed through the room. Verity felt it like warmth near a candle, though she knew better than to move toward it too quickly. The dowager's expression remained composed. How gallant! Though one hopes gallantry will not be confused with judgment. Miss Hale has grown unusually noticeable for a lady in her position. A few eyes dropped. Rosamund's lashes lowered. Verity had learned that public insult often wore the clothing of concern. It allowed everyone to pretend no one had been cruel. Adrian walked to the center of the room and did not sit. Then she may as well be heard accurately. The dowager's fan stilled. Heard. Miss Hale found Bracken distressed last night. She treated him with a salve. That is the extent of what she has admitted. I have asked her to speak as a witness, not as an offender. Rosamund gave a little laugh. A witness to her own interference. Verity answered before Adrian could. To a wound, my lady. The room quieted. Rosamund's smile sharpened. You are very certain for someone who encountered him only by moonlight. Pain is not less visible by moonlight. The words came out calm. Verity thanked every hardier that had taught her not to tremble until she was alone. The dowager's gaze slid to Adrian. And what does Miss Hale claim to have seen? She has not claimed more than she knows, Adrian said. That is a discipline not everyone in this room has practiced today. One of the gentlemen coughed into his hand. The dowager's face cooled by another degree. Rosamund's fingers tightened on her handkerchief. Your Grace, surely you do not imagine I had anything to do with the animal's agitation. Adrian did not answer at once. He took the small blue thread from his pocket and laid it on the polished table beside the untouched tea tray. I imagine very little. I observe. Rosamund looked at the thread. For one instant, her expression lost its grace. Then it returned. A scrap of cloth? At a country house before a hunt? How mysterious. Near the kennel gate, Adrian said. Caught in the wood. The dowager rose, not quickly, but with enough force to end lesser conversations. Westmere, this is intolerable. You cannot permit a house party to become an inquiry over a hound and a companion's sentimental mistake. I will not permit a servant to be dismissed, a hound to be punished, or a woman to be disgraced because truth is inconvenient. Verity looked down at her glove because looking at him became suddenly difficult. He had not said he believed her. Not plainly. But he had moved a piece of the world between her and its appetite. The dowager turned to her. Miss Hale, you may withdraw. Adrian's voice stopped her before she could curtsy. In a moment. He faced Verity. The mark on Bracken. The salve. The hour you found him. I will need your account written before dinner. My account? Verity asked. Yes. In your own words. Rosamund's smile trembled at the edge. The dowager went still. Verity understood then why it mattered. Not a confession composed for her. Not an apology shaped by rank. Her own words. She curtsied, and this time the movement did not feel like surrender. Of course, Your Grace. As she turned to leave, Adrian spoke softly enough that only she could hear. I owe you a better question. Verity did not look back. If she had, she feared the room would see what those words had done to her. At the doorway, she passed Rosamund's maid, a slight girl with anxious eyes who stepped quickly aside. The maid's gaze flicked to Verity's right glove, then away. It was too quick to mean nothing. Behind Verity, Rosamund said in a silken voice, this has all become very dramatic over a dog. From the courtyard beyond the windows, Bracken gave one low, restless call. It carried through the glass, through the silk, through the room where everyone was pretending not to hear the truth come nearer. By the time Verity reached the small bedchamber assigned to her beneath the sloping eastern roof, the glove on her right hand felt less like clothing than a confession. She closed the door, leaned against it for one permitted breath, and listened to Briarford Park continuing without her. Footsteps passed in the corridor. Somewhere below, a bell rang for fresh tea. Ladies who had watched her be measured and doubted would now be discussing her over porcelain cups, deciding whether compassion made her charming, troublesome, or absurd. Verity removed her bonnet, then her left glove, then reached for the right. The old doeskin resisted at the thumb where she had stitched it years ago after a winter walk tore the seam. When it came free, the scent of lavender, beeswax, and salve rose faintly. She laid it on the washstand beside its fellow and stared at the pair as if they could answer for her. One glove had touched a wounded hound. One glove had become visible. That was all it had taken to turn kindness into evidence. She sat at the little writing table and began the account His Grace had requested. Her hand was steady at first. At approximately 9 o'clock last evening, I heard distress from the kennel yard. I found Bracken near the gate. I observed a sore mark near his shoulder. I applied a small amount of salve. She paused, pen lifted, because the truth looked poor when made into ink. It lacked the sound of Bracken's frightened breath. It lacked the cold stone under her knees and the sharp tap of a crop in the dark. It lacked the knowledge that some pains only revealed themselves to people quiet enough to hear them. A knock came before she could write more. "Come in," Verity said. Lady Rosamund entered without waiting for the final syllable. She had changed again, this time into soft lavender muslin that made her appear younger and injured by the world's unkindness. Her maid followed carrying a shawl, eyes lowered. Verity recognized her as the anxious girl from the drawing-room door. "Still writing?" Rosamund asked. "How diligent?" Verity rose. "His Grace requested an account." "Yes, he has become very interested in accounts. Wounds. Threads. Salves. Poor Bracken. Poor Miss Hale. One hardly knows where to place one's sympathy." The maid moved toward the washstand to set down the shawl she was not asked to set down. Her gaze flicked once to the gloves. Verity noticed. Rosamund noticed Verity noticing. The lady smiled. "You must be exhausted by all this sudden importance." "It is not importance I would have chosen." "No, of course not. Women never choose attention when it arrives badly. They merely keep it if it proves useful." Verity folded the unfinished account and set the pen aside. "Did you come for a reason, my lady?" "To be kind." Rosamund's voice softened into something almost tender. "You may not believe me, but I do understand loneliness. It can make one attach meaning to very small things. A hound's trust. A duke's question. A room falling silent when one speaks. It must be intoxicating after years of being overlooked." The maid's fingers tightened around the shawl. Verity kept her eyes on Rosamund. "If you understand loneliness, my lady, then you have my sympathy." For a moment, Rosamund's face went blank. Then she laughed, lightly enough to cover the wound. "There. That is what I mean. You have become confused by attention. It has made you sharp." She turned toward the maid. "Annie, fetch my vinaigrette from the dressing case. I feel a headache beginning." The maid curtsied and slipped out. Rosamund lingered by the washstand, one gloved hand resting near Verity's old gloves. "Her Grace is concerned for you." "How generous." "Do not be proud, Verity. Pride sits badly on women who depend upon others. Her Grace believes a little distance might spare you further embarrassment. A few days away, perhaps with that aunt of yours near the estate boundary, until this fuss settles." Verity heard the kindness dressed around the exile. It was neat. It was clean. It was exactly how powerful people removed an inconvenient woman while claiming they had protected her. "And Lady Rosamund?" she asked. "Will she also take distance from the fuss?" Rosamund's eyes cooled. Lady Rosamund was humiliated before guests because a companion forgot her place. A hound forgot his fear long enough to show where he trusted. Careful. The word was still soft, but the silk had slipped enough to show the blade beneath. You have survived this house by being useful. Do not mistake usefulness for safety. Annie returned with the vinaigrette. Rosamund accepted it, pressed it delicately beneath her nose, and moved to the door. Do rest. You look pale. It will make people talk. She left with a whisper of muslin and perfume. The maid followed, but in the last instant she looked back. Not at Verity's face. At the washstand. Verity waited until the corridor quieted, then turned. The right glove was gone. For several seconds, she simply stood there, unable to make the room arrange itself into sense. The left glove lay where she had placed it. The washbowl, the folded towel, the little cracked soap dish, all remained. Only the mended doeskin glove had vanished. The glove that smelled of salve. The glove Bracken had touched. The glove everyone had seen. Verity crossed the room, lifted the towel, checked beneath the writing paper, opened the drawer she knew she had not opened. Nothing. Her breath came once, shallow and angry. Then a second knock sounded. This time, when the door opened, Adrian Vale stood outside with Mrs. Vale several paces behind him in the corridor. The sight of him there, formal and controlled, should have steadied her. Instead, it made her feel how alone she had been before he arrived. Miss Hale, he said. My mother has suggested you may prefer to leave Briarford for a few days. There it was. Spoken more gently than Rosamund had spoken it, but carrying the same shape. Verity stepped back from the washstand before he could see the empty place and the distress it had caused. Do you also suggest it, Your Grace? He looked at her carefully. I suggest nothing without asking what you want. The answer should have comforted her. It did not. It felt like a door held open toward removal. What I want seems to have become a matter of household convenience. His brow tightened. That is not what I meant. No. But it may be what happens. If I leave now, the story will settle before the truth does. By dinner, I will not be Miss Hale who tended an injured hound. I will be Miss Hale who was sent away after being found out. I will not permit that. Will you not? The question came too quickly, but she could not draw it back. You may forbid servants from being dismissed and hounds from being punished. You may even stop Lady Rosamund from demanding an apology. But you cannot stand in every drawing room once I am gone. Adrian's expression changed. A small contraction near the eyes. Pain, perhaps. Or recognition. Then do not go. The words were quiet. Verity wanted to believe them. She wanted it so fiercely that pride came to save her from hope. I have been told all morning that my presence is the problem. If I remain by your permission, I become another object in dispute. If I leave by my own choice, at least that choice belongs to me. Mrs. Vale lowered her eyes, not in disapproval, but because she had heard something private. Adrian looked as though he wished to step closer and knew he must not. Miss Hale, something is being concealed. Yes, Verity said. Her voice did not tremble. And I believe someone has just stolen my glove. The silence sharpened. Adrian's gaze went to the washstand, saw the single glove, and understood at once. Who was here? Lady Rosamund. Her maid. Did you see either take it? No, then I will ask quietly. Quietly. Verity said. Yes. That is what frightens me, Your Grace. He went still. She hated that she had wounded him, yet could not regret it. The world has been quiet about me all my life. Quiet when I was useful. Quiet when I was insulted. Quiet when I was nearly blamed. I am beginning to think quiet is where inconvenient truths are put to sleep. Adrian said nothing for a moment. Then he bowed, not deeply, not theatrically, but with an old and grave courtesy. I hear you. It was not enough. It was too much. Verity curtsied because she needed something to do with her heart. After he left, she returned to the writing table, took a clean sheet, and wrote a second letter with steadier ink than she felt. Your Grace, after the conclusion of the present house party, I must resign my position as companion to Lady Rosamund Eversley. I am grateful for the hospitality extended to me at Briarford Park. I cannot remain where kindness may be used as an accusation and silence as a remedy." She folded it before she could weaken. Dusk had begun to gather when a small scratch came at her door. Annie slipped inside, pale and trembling, with one hand pressed to her apron. "Miss Hale, I shouldn't be here." Verity stood. "What is it?" The maid swallowed. "Your glove isn't lost." Verity's fingers tightened on the chair back. "Where is it?" Annie's eyes filled with fear. "In Lady Rosamund's room. Hidden beneath the blue ribbon box." Annie's confession should have changed everything, but by dinner it had changed nothing except the way Verity Hale understood danger. It did not always enter with a raised voice. Sometimes it sat beneath candlelight, wore rose silk, and waited for the soup course to be cleared before smiling across a table. The great dining room at Briarford Park glittered as if no animal had recoiled, no glove had vanished, and no poor companion had been quietly marked for ruin. 3 chandeliers burned above the long table. Silver warmed beneath the flames. The guests had been arranged with brutal elegance, rank flowing outward from the Dowager Duchess as naturally as blood from a heart. Lady Rosamund sat near her Grace Octavia Vale, pale and composed, the picture of injured breeding. Verity had been placed far enough down the table to remind everyone that she was not a true guest, yet near enough for every glance to find her. It was a clever seat. It allowed her to be watched without being honored. Adrian Vale sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. Once, before the first course, his eyes had met hers across the room. There had been no warmth in the look, no promise that could be mistaken for rescue. Yet there was a tension. Steady. Unblinking. Verity had not told him what Annie had said. Not yet. Annie had begged her not to, shaking so badly that Verity had feared the girl would collapse at her feet. "She'll send me away without a character," Annie had whispered. "Please, Miss Hale, I shouldn't have spoken." So Verity had kept the girl's name behind her teeth and entered the dining room with her right hand bare beneath the table, the left glove folded in her lap like half of a lost truth. She had never felt more visible. "It is remarkable," Lady Rosamund said when the fish had been removed and the footmen moved like shadows along the walls, "how country houses bring out peculiar intimacies. One discovers attachments no one suspected." A countess smiled. "You speak of the hounds, Lady Rosamund." "Among other creatures," Rosamund replied. Soft laughter travelled down the table. Verity kept her gaze on her plate. Her appetite had left before she Saturday. The dowager lifted her glass with measured grace. "Briarford has always valued loyalty. Proper loyalty, that is. Loyalty that understands order." "An excellent distinction, Your Grace," said a gentleman near the centre of the table. "Even dogs must know their master." "Indeed," Rosamund said. "And yet they may be confused if handled too freely by others." There it was. The first thread laid across the table. Verity felt it brush her throat. Adrian did not speak. He cut a piece of bread with calm precision and waited. Waiting, Verity was beginning to learn, could be more frightening than interruption. Rosamund turned slightly, enough to make her voice carry without seeming directed. "I have been advised to let the matter drop. It is ungenerous to dwell on embarrassment, especially when the person responsible may not have understood the effect of her actions." The room quieted by degrees. Spoons lowered. A footman at the sideboard stilled too long before remembering himself. Verity looked up. Rosamund's eyes were on her now. "Miss Hale," Rosamund said, with a sweetness that made denial look rude before it was offered, "you were often in the kennels, were you not?" "No, my lady." "No?" Rosamund tilted her head. "How strange. I have heard otherwise." Verity's heart beat once, hard. "I was there last night because Bracken was distressed. I have not said otherwise." "Only last night?" "Yes." Rosamund's lashes lowered. "Then someone has misinformed me." A young footman near the door went white. Verity saw him before others did. He could not have been more than 17, with hands too large for his sleeves and fear written plainly across his face. Rosamund saw him too and smiled. "Thomas, is it?" The boy froze. "Yes, my lady." You told my maid you had seen Miss Hale near the kennels more than once. Verity felt the table turn toward him. The boy's eyes darted to the Dowager, then to Rosamund, then to the floor. I may have, my lady. You may have? Rosamund's voice remained gentle. Do speak clearly. No one will punish honesty. The lie was so smooth that it almost shone. Thomas swallowed. I saw Miss Hale near the yard yesterday. And the night before, perhaps. Perhaps? Adrian said. It was the first word he had spoken since Rosamund began. Thomas flinched. I am not certain, Your Grace. Then you will not pretend to certainty for entertainment. A thin silence cut the room. Rosamund's colour rose, but she recovered quickly. Your Grace is right, of course. We must rely only upon what can be seen. She reached beneath the edge of her chair, where her reticule rested against the folds of her gown. Verity knew before the object appeared. Her body knew. Her breath knew. Rosamund lifted the mended doeskin glove between two fingers as if it were something faintly unpleasant found in a drawer. This, for instance, can be seen. The room went silent. Not polite silence. Hungry silence. Verity stared at the glove. The old seam across the palm looked painfully humble under candlelight. A smear darkened the thumb, not from salve alone. Something else glistened faintly near the cuff. Perfume. Rosamund's perfume. Sharp flowers over lavender and beeswax. Adrian's gaze fixed on the glove. His face did not alter, but his hand went still beside his plate. Where did you find that? He asked. Rosamund smiled as though he had asked exactly the right question. In Miss Hale's effects. No, Verity said. The word was quiet, but it broke from her before caution could soften it. No. Rosamund repeated. It was taken from my room. How unfortunate that the object itself cannot agree with you. Rosamund turned it so the guests could see the stained seam. The hounds recognized this, did they not? Lavender. Salve. Familiar scent. If one wished to make a pack appear devoted before witnesses, one might do precisely this. Murmurs rose like smoke. Poor companion. Ambition. Duke. Hounds. Verity heard none of the words clearly. She heard only their direction. They were moving toward her. They were making a shape around her that she might never escape. She stood before she had been granted permission. The chair sounded too loud against the floor. I went to the kennel because Bracken was hurt. Rosamund's smile sharpened. You have said so often. I did not train them. I did not seek attention. I did not take anything from Lady Rosamund or from this house. Except sympathy, Rosamund said. And his Grace's attention. A few guests looked down. That was worse than staring. It meant the accusation had found a place to sit. Verity turned toward Adrian, not pleading, not asking for rescue, but because the corridor words had burned inside her all evening. Will you believe me where they can hear it? He rose. Every sound in the room died. Dinner is concluded. The Dowager's head snapped toward him. Westmere. The guests may withdraw to the drawing room. You cannot dismiss a table because Miss Hale has become emotional. I can dismiss any table in my house when decency has left it. Rosamund's face went pale. Adrian looked at the glove in her hand. Place that on the table. Your Grace, I only wish to make plain, place it on the table. She obeyed because there was no graceful way not to. Adrian did not touch the glove at once. He leaned closer, just enough for Verity to see what he saw. The mark near the cuff held Rosamund's perfume, bright and unmistakable, layered over the older salve. His eyes lifted to Verity. For 1 second, the room fell away. He believed her. Or he had begun to. Yet belief, she had learned, did not mend what public doubt had torn. The guests rose in uneasy clusters. Chairs moved. Silk whispered. The Dowager guided Rosamund toward the door with a hand firm enough to look like support and feel like command. Verity remained standing until only Mrs. Vale and 2 footmen lingered near the wall. Then Adrian came to her side, not close enough for impropriety, but close enough that she did not have to raise her voice. "Miss Hale," he said, "I believe something has been done to injure you." She looked at him in the candlelight, at the man who had stopped the room after the room had already heard enough to condemn her. "Do you believe me?" "Yes." The answer was immediate. It should have comforted her. Instead, the ache inside her sharpened. "Will you believe me where they can hear it?" His face changed. He understood then. Private belief was a candle in a locked room. Public ruin burned in the open. "I will," he said. Verity lowered her eyes, not because she doubted the words, but because she feared what hope would do if she looked at him too long. "Then I pray you do it before I am gone." His voice dropped. "Gone?" She gathered her one remaining glove from her lap. "I leave Briarford in the morning." Somewhere beyond the windows, in the darkened yard, a hound gave a low, restless call, as if the house itself had heard her and refused to let the matter end. Morning came to Briarford Park with the cruel neatness of a house determined to pretend nothing had been broken. The gravel before the side entrance had been swept. A modest carriage waited beyond the shallow steps, its wheels dark with damp, its driver sitting stiffly beneath a low grey sky. Verity Hale's trunk had already been strapped behind it, though there was so little in that trunk that the leather straps looked almost insulting in their seriousness. Mrs. Vale stood near the door, her face composed, but her eyes kind. Beside her waited a maid assigned to travel as far as the small cottage near the estate boundary where Verity's aunt sometimes took in relatives for short visits and long disappointments. The arrangement was proper. That was what made it unbearable. Every propriety had been observed so that no one could say Miss Hale had been cast out. She was merely leaving. She was merely being spared further unpleasantness. She was merely disappearing before the story settled into the shape Lady Rosamund had chosen for it. Verity wore her grey-blue gown, her plain bonnet, and only one glove. The missing one had not been returned. Its absence felt louder than any accusation spoken at dinner. As she descended the steps, she saw two footmen pause in the hall behind her, not staring, not quite looking away. Already she could imagine the words passing from pantry to laundry, from stable to village, from village to London. Miss Hale left after breakfast. His Grace did not stop her. Lady Rosamund remained. There were many ways for society to write guilt without ink. She had just reached the carriage door when Adrian Vale came from the direction of the stables, hatless despite the cold, his dark coat unbuttoned as if he had dressed too quickly to remember ceremony. He stopped 3 feet from her, far enough to satisfy the watching house, near enough that his voice could remain low. "Miss Hale." Verity curtsied because her body had been trained before her heart had learned protest. "Your Grace." His eyes went briefly to her bare right hand. The look was so swift that a careless person would have missed it. Verity did not. "You need not go," he said. "I will clear your name." There was no grandeur in the promise. That made it more dangerous. Grand promises could be dismissed as performance. This sounded like a decision he had already made. Verity looked toward the carriage, then back at him. "After I am gone, every defense will sound like charity." A flicker crossed his face. "It will not be charity. Not to you, perhaps." Her voice remained steady. "But those who watched dinner last night will not say you corrected a lie. They will say you pitied a woman who had already been removed." Mrs. Vale lowered her eyes. The maid beside the carriage tightened her hand around the door strap. Adrian heard all of it. The silence after Verity spoke was colder than the morning air. "Then stay," he said. The word was quiet. It struck harder than if he had commanded it. For one brief, foolish second, Verity saw herself doing so. Remaining. Standing in the drawing-room when Lady Rosamund smiled. Waiting beside the Duke while he questioned servants and threads and perfume. Letting his authority become a wall around her. Then she saw the dinner table again. The glove held between Rosamund's fingers. The guests looking down because they had already believed enough to be ashamed of it. "If I stay because you ask, I become another dispute under your roof," she said. "If I leave because I choose, at least one part of this morning belongs to me." He looked as though the words had found a place beneath his ribs. I mistook distance for shelter. The admission was so plain that Verity nearly softened. Nearly. You are not the first person to do so, Your Grace. I do not want to be counted with them. Her hand closed around the carriage door. Then do not defend me too late. For a moment, neither of them moved. The house seemed to hold its breath behind them. Then Adrian stepped back. He did not help her into the carriage because that small intimacy would have become another whisper. He only bowed, grave and restrained, as if honoring a departure he had failed to prevent. Verity climbed in with the maid after her. The door shut. The carriage rolled forward. She did not look back until the turn in the drive forced her eyes to the window. Adrian still stood on the steps. Behind him, in an upper window, Verity glimpsed the pale blur of Lady Rosamund's face watching from behind the glass. The carriage passed the kennels, and then Briarford Park began to withdraw behind bare branches and grey fields. Verity pressed her ungloved hand into her lap. She had expected to feel free. Instead, she felt erased. They had gone perhaps half a mile down the estate road when the maid beside her gave a startled cry. "Miss Hale, look!" Verity turned. Behind the carriage, a brown and white shape came racing along the road, ears flying, paws striking the damp earth with urgent rhythm. Bracken! The driver swore under his breath and pulled the horses carefully to a slower pace. The hound did not bark. He ran straight for the carriage, then came alongside and threw himself ahead of it, not in a wild challenge, but with such determined placement that the horses tossed their heads and stopped of their own accord. "He'll be hurt," the maid whispered. Verity was already opening the door. "Bracken," she called, stepping down before the driver could assist her. "What are you doing?" The hound came to her at once, pressed his head against her bare hand, then turned toward the narrow track that branched from the main road toward an old hunting shed half hidden behind thorn and wet grass. He took 3 steps, looked back, and gave a low impatient sound. Verity's heart began to beat faster. A rider appeared over the rise behind them, moving fast but controlled. Adrian! He reined in near the carriage, his horse's breath white in the cold air. "Is he hurt?" he asked. "No," Verity said. "He wants us to follow." Adrian's gaze moved from Bracken to the track. "Then we follow." He dismounted, handed the reins to the driver, and walked beside Verity, close enough to steady her if the ground turned, not close enough to claim the right. Bracken led them through wet grass to the shed, an old timber structure used for storing hunting tack and broken tools. The door hung slightly ajar. Inside, the air smelled of dust, leather, and old straw. Light entered through a crack in the boards, falling in a narrow stripe across the floor. Bracken went straight to the far corner and sniffed beneath a wooden bench. Adrian crouched. Verity stood at the threshold with the maid behind her, aware that stepping inside with him alone would invite exactly the kind of gossip she had spent her life avoiding. Adrian seemed to understand. He did not ask her to enter. Instead, he reached beneath the bench and drew out something small between gloved fingers. An ivory chip, curved and polished, broken from an ornamental handle. Verity saw it and knew. Rosamund's riding crop. Adrian placed it in his palm, then searched the rough edge of the bench. A blue thread clung there, darker than the torn scrap from the kennel gate, but of the same fine wool. "She was here," Verity said. Her voice sounded distant to herself. Adrian looked up. "Yes." Bracken nosed the corner again, then turned and pressed against Verity's skirts as if his part had been done. Adrian rose slowly, the ivory chip in his hand. There was no triumph in his face. Only anger disciplined into purpose. "My mother will say your leaving proves guilt." "I know." "Lady Rosamund will let her." "I know that too." He looked toward the road, where the carriage waited between hedges wet with mist. "Come back." Verity's heart gave one painful beat. "Not yet." His face tightened. "Miss Hale. If I return now because you have found a chip of ivory, they will say I ran back the moment hope favored me. I will not spend my life being moved from place to place by other people's conclusions." The word surprised them both. Bracken lifted his head. Adrian stood very still, then bowed once. "Then I will come to the truth without dragging you behind me." Verity looked at the broken ivory in his hand. And if the truth is not enough, then I will make the room large enough to hear it. It was not a lover's promise. It was not yet even a friend's. But it was closer to the thing she had asked of him than anything he had offered before. Verity returned to the carriage with Bracken walking at her side until Adrian called him back. The hound obeyed only after one last press of his head against her hand. As the carriage rolled on toward the Boundary cottage, Verity watched through the rear window. Adrian stood in the road with Bracken beside him and the ivory chip closed in his fist. Briarford had let her leave. But something hidden inside its walls had begun to follow her. The cottage at the edge of Briarford land had once belonged to a widowed aunt of Verity's mother, and it possessed the peculiar sadness of houses that opened their doors to women who had nowhere more flattering to go. Its front parlour was clean, low-ceilinged, and scented faintly of lavender kept in muslin bags to discourage damp. A narrow lane ran beyond the garden wall, and across that lane the Duke of Westmere's fields rolled back toward the great house that had let Verity leave with all the courtesy required to disguise disgrace. Her aunt, Mrs. Clara Fenwick, had not asked too many questions when Verity arrived. That was why Verity loved her. Some women offered kindness by asking. Others offered it by placing hot tea on the table and allowing silence to gather without shame. "You may remain as long as you need," Mrs. Fenwick said, setting down a plate of toast. "Though I suspect Briarford has not finished with you." Verity stood at the little window, watching the grey afternoon settle over the lane. "Briarford finished with me quite efficiently this morning. Great houses are rarely efficient when they have done wrong. They spend days arranging curtains around it." Verity almost smiled. Then she saw a figure hurrying along the lane, cloak pulled tight, head lowered against the wind. "Annie!" The maid stopped at the gate, looked back once toward the road, and then came forward so quickly that her skirts caught on the wet hedge. Verity opened the door before she knocked. "Annie, you should not be here." "I know, miss." Annie's face was pale from cold and fear. "But she's going to say it tonight. Lady Rosamund. She's going to make her Grace present her in the great drawing-room before his Grace can speak." Mrs. Fenwick stepped back without a word and closed the parlour door, giving them what privacy a cottage could manage. Verity drew Annie toward the fire. "Sit." "I can't stay. Mrs. Thorne thinks I took a bundle to the laundry." "Then tell me quickly." Annie twisted her hands together. "The glove was in her room. I saw it. She told me to put it beneath the blue ribbon box, but after dinner she took it out. She laughed and said Miss Hale had very useful hands. Then she used it to rub the handle of her crop." Verity felt the room narrow. "To place the scent on it?" "I think so. Salve. Perfume. Everything mixed. I didn't understand at first." Annie swallowed. "Thomas did. He saw her near the kennels yesterday, miss. He saw her strike at Bracken when the hound mudded her skirt. Not hard enough to lay him low, but enough to frighten him. She told Thomas if he spoke, she would say he had left the gate open and let the dogs run." Verity closed her eyes for one brief second. Poor Thomas, forced to stammer at dinner while titled people turned cowardice into etiquette. "Where is the glove now?" "Back in her dressing case, I think. She means to use it again if anyone questions her. She says everyone will believe a lady over a companion, and her Grace will not let his Grace ruin the match over a dog. The Duke knows about the ivory chip. She knows that too." Annie's voice dropped. "That is why she is hurrying. If her Grace names her before the guests tonight, it will be harder to undo without making the whole house look foolish." Verity turned away from the fire. Her reflection in the dark window startled her. She looked tired, plain, and stubborn. For a moment, she was ashamed of how much comfort that stubbornness gave her. "Annie, listen to me. You must not repeat this in a corridor. You must go to Mrs. Vale if you are afraid." Annie shook her head. "Mrs. Vale is watched. Lady Rosamund has her own maid asking questions. Then go to Pritchard. Tell him I sent you. Tell him Thomas must not be left alone to be frightened into another lie." Annie looked at her as if she had expected anger and found strategy instead. "You're coming back, aren't you?" Verity looked toward the road that led to Briarford Park. She thought of Adrian standing in the lane with the ivory chip closed in his fist. She thought of his promise to make the room large enough to hear truth. Then she thought of Thomas at the dining room wall, Annie shaking in a borrowed patch of courage, and Bracken pressing his head into her bare hand as if trust could be carried from one wounded creature to another. Yes, she said. But not first to his grace. At Briarford Park, the Dowager Duchess stood before the mirror in her private sitting room while Lady Rosamund adjusted the fall of her sleeve. The room smelled of amber, firelight, and social calculation. "You will be calm tonight," her grace said. "You will not answer accusation with agitation. You will allow me to speak of continuity, dignity, and the future of the house." Rosamund fastened a pearl bracelet at her wrist. "And his grace?" "My son respects the house, even when he resents being reminded of it. He has been asking questions." The dowager's eyes sharpened in the glass. Men ask questions when they do not wish to make decisions. Tonight, he will be given one already made. Rosamund smiled, but the smile did not settle. Miss Hale left. Yes. That was wise. Wise women do not always stay gone. Her grace turned from the mirror. "Are you afraid of her?" Rosamund laughed. "Of Verity?" "No. Of the use his grace may make of her, perhaps. A man who believes himself just can become very tiresome over a woman he has wronged. Then he must be reminded what injustice truly costs. If he casts doubt on you now, he insults your father, damages an alliance, humiliates his mother, and tells every guest at Briarford that a companion's word outweighs breeding. And if the companion returns, then she will be pitied for not knowing when to withdraw." A knock came before Rosamund could answer. A footman entered with a folded note on a silver tray. "For your grace." The dowager opened it, read, and grew very still. "Westmere refuses the formal announcement." Rosamund's hand tightened around the back of a chair. "Refuses. He says there will be no announcement until all questions concerning the kennels are settled." For the first time that day, Lady Rosamund forgot to look lovely. "Then settle them tonight." Her grace folded the note with exquisite care. "I intend to." In the servants' hall, Verity arrived through the side entrance with Mrs. Fenwick's old cloak around her shoulders and no wish to be seen by guests. Pritchard came when Annie fetched him, his cap in his hands and alarm on his weathered face. Thomas stood beside him, trembling so hard that the buttons on his livery seemed to quiver. "Miss Hale," Pritchard said, "you should not have come through here. Nor should truth have to enter by the front door to be believed." Thomas looked at the floor. "I lied, miss." "Not all of it. I saw you near the yard, but not as she made it sound. I saw Lady Rosamund too. She told me she'd have me turned off without a character if I spoke." Verity softened her voice. "Then you will not speak alone." "His grace should hear this," Pritchard said. "He will," Verity answered. "But first I need you to make certain no groom, maid, or boy disappears before evening." Pritchard's face changed. Respect entered it, grave and immediate. "I, miss." "And Annie," Verity said, turning to the maid, "you must not take the glove from Lady Rosamund's room. If we touch it secretly, she will call us thieves before she calls herself false." Annie nodded, frightened but steadier now. Footsteps sounded above, crisp and purposeful. The house was gathering itself for the great drawing room. Verity lifted her chin. She had left Briarford to keep one choice for herself. Now she had returned with another. She would not run to the Duke like a rescued creature. She would walk back into the room that had made her small, and she would carry other frightened voices with her. At the top of the servants' stair, Mrs. Vale waited in black silk, expression composed. "Miss Hale," she said quietly, "her grace has sent word. Tonight Lady Rosamund is to be presented in the great drawing room." Verity looked past her toward the lit corridors, where every candle seemed to burn for a lie. "Then we must arrive before the lie becomes tradition." Adrian Vale found Verity Hale not in the drawing room, where his mother had expected to triumph, but in the narrow passage beyond the servants' stair, standing beneath a bracket lamp with Mrs. Vale on one side and frightened Truth gathering behind her. Annie hovered near the wall with both hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles had gone pale. Thomas stood beside Pritchard, his young face drained, his livery too large for the weight placed upon him. Verity wore Mrs. Fenwick's dark cloak over the same grey-blue gown in which she had left Briarford that morning. Her right hand was bare. That absence struck Adrian before anything else. One missing glove had become the shape of every failure in the house. He stopped at the end of the passage, and everyone dipped or bowed at once except Verity. She only looked at him, not insolently, not meekly, but with the stillness of a woman deciding whether a powerful man had finally become useful to justice or merely dangerous to hope. "Miss Hale," he said. "Your Grace." Her voice did not tremble. That made him feel the distance between them more sharply than any accusation could have done. He looked past her to Pritchard. "You have something to tell me." "Aye, Your Grace," Pritchard said. "More than one thing." Thomas swallowed hard. Annie's eyes filled at once, though she did not cry. Adrian lifted one hand, and the passage quieted. "No servant who speaks truth tonight will be dismissed from Briarford for it. No character will be withheld. No wages will be touched. Mrs. Vale, you will see that written in the household book before midnight." Mrs. Vale bowed. "Yes, Your Grace." Verity's expression changed so slightly that only a man already watching her would have seen it. Relief, swiftly hidden. Not for herself. For them. That pierced him more deeply than gratitude would have. "You should have said that yesterday," she said quietly. Adrian accepted the blow because it was deserved. "Yes." The single word moved through the passage with more weight than any defense. Verity looked down first, as if his admission had unsettled her more than an excuse would have. "I came back for them," she said. "I know. Not for you." "I know that too." Annie looked between them, confused by the softness of words that were not soft at all. Adrian turned toward the small service room at the side of the passage, the one Mrs. Vale used for household ledgers when too much work collected near the kitchens. "Inside. All of you. We speak here first, where no one is performing for my mother." The room was plain, with a scrubbed table, 2 chairs, a narrow window, and a shelf of keys labelled with the severe order by which Briarford survived. Verity entered last. Adrian noticed she chose a place near the door, where she could leave if she wished. He did not ask her to move. Pritchard laid the small evidence on the table. A torn blue thread wrapped in paper. The ivory chip from the old hunting shed. A short written note from the stable record stating that Lady Rosamund's crop had returned to the tack room with its handle damaged after luncheon the previous day, though no one had dared mention it. Then Annie spoke, voice low and thin, of the glove placed beneath the ribbon box, taken out again, and used against the crop handle with salve and perfume mingled together. Thomas followed, stumbling at first, then steadier when Verity turned toward him and nodded once. He had seen Lady Rosamund near the kennel gate. He had seen Bracken startle away from her. He had been told that boys without families could be removed for careless tongues. Adrian listened without interrupting. Anger tried to rise in him, but he forced it down into usefulness. Anger would frighten the truthful before it punished the false. "You will not be asked to repeat more than you know," he said when Thomas finished. "Certainty only. No embroidery. No guessing. Truth does not need decoration." Thomas nodded, almost sagging with relief. Verity looked at Adrian then, and for a moment the room held only the two of them. "That is what I needed from you at the beginning," she said. "Not belief shaped like rescue. Room enough for truth." He felt the sentence settle where pride had lived too comfortably. "Then let me give it now." Mrs. Vale ushered Annie, Thomas, and Pritchard into the passage with quiet efficiency, promising tea and a guarded place near the lower hall until they were called. The door remained ajar after they left. Adrian had made certain it would. Verity noticed. "Still careful," she said. "With your reputation, yes. Mine has been handled very carefully all day. It is bruised all the same." "I know." He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and withdrew the mended doeskin glove. Verity went utterly still. "How did you get it?" "Not by theft." "Mrs. Vale asked Lady Rosamund's maid to bring down the blue ribbon box for inspection in the presence of 2 witnesses. The glove was beneath the lining. Verity did not reach for it. Her face had lost color. "Then it was there." "Yes." And still she will smile. Yes. He held the glove out, palm up, as though returning something more fragile than leather. I had it wiped only of fresh dust. The old stitching remains. The scent remains enough for Bracken to know it. I would not make it prettier in order to make it acceptable. Her fingers moved then. She took the glove from him, slowly, and held it against her bare hand. The gesture was so small that another man might have missed the wound inside it. Adrian did not. Miss Hale, he said, I must ask you to enter that room tonight. Her eyes lifted. As your witness, or as your shield? The question struck cleanly. He had deserved it before she asked. As yourself, he said. I will not speak over you again. That is not the same as standing with me. No. It is the condition that makes standing with you honorable. For the first time, uncertainty touched her composure. It made her look younger for one breath, then braver the next. And if your mother tries to end the matter, she will find that Briarford is my house. And if Lady Rosamund weeps, then she may weep truthfully or waste the effort. A faint, reluctant curve touched Verity's mouth, gone almost before it formed. That sounds ungenerous. I have been generous in the wrong direction. Silence followed. Not empty silence. Something living stood inside it, something neither of them could name without making the hour smaller. From beyond the passage came the muted stir of the house gathering above them. Footmen carried lamps toward the great drawing room. Guests moved like pieces on a board they believed belonged to rank. Somewhere, Her Grace was preparing a speech about dignity. Somewhere, Lady Rosamund was preparing the face of a woman wronged. Verity slipped the glove onto her right hand. The old mended seam crossed her palm like a line of memory. I will speak my part, she said. No one else will soften it. No one will. And the servants? Protected. Not merely tonight. As long as they are under my roof. She searched his face, looking for the flaw in the promise. He let her look. He had hidden too much behind authority already. At last she nodded. Then I will come. Adrian bowed his head, not in victory, but in gratitude he did not trust his voice to carry properly. When they stepped back into the passage, Mrs. Vale stood ready with a shawl, Pritchard waited like a man facing weather, and Annie wiped her cheeks before anyone could pretend to notice. From the far end of the corridor, a footman approached quickly and bowed. Your Grace, Her Grace has begun. The guests are assembled in the great drawing room. Adrian looked at Verity. One more thing. She paused. Yes? I cannot promise society will be merciful. I stopped expecting mercy from society some time ago. But I can promise this. No one under my roof will bury the truth because it is inconvenient to hear. Her hand closed once around the returned glove. Then open the door, Your Grace. Together, not touching, they walked toward the sound of his mother's voice and the room where every candle had been lit to honor a lie. The great drawing room of Briarford Park had never looked more beautiful, which made its purpose that evening feel almost indecent. Every candle had been lit. The mirrors doubled the flames until the wall seemed lined with watchful fire. The curtains were drawn against the dark, and the guests stood in loose, glittering clusters beneath portraits of Vale ancestors who had mastered the art of looking disappointed from beyond the grave. Her Grace Octavia Vale stood near the center of the room with Lady Rosamund at her side, and the arrangement of them was so deliberate that no one could mistake it for companionship. The Dowager wore black silk with diamonds at her throat. Rosamund wore pale blue, the exact shade of the ceremonial ribbon now pinned at her shoulder as if the morning's disgrace had been corrected by fabric. She looked wounded, graceful, and ready to be believed. Verity paused at the threshold beside Adrian. The air of the room struck her first. Warmth, perfume, wax, old velvet, an expectation. Then came the silence. It did not fall all at once. It moved. A lady near the pianoforte saw her first and stopped speaking. A gentleman by the mantel turned. Mrs. Vale entered behind Verity and took her place along the wall, not as a servant hiding from attention, but as a witness. Pritchard remained beyond the open doors that led toward the terrace and courtyard, where two grooms waited with Bracken held calmly on a lead. The hound could be seen through the doorway when the candlelight reached his coat. That, too, was deliberate. Adrian had not brought the Hound into the drawing-room to turn truth into a circus. He had placed him where no one could pretend he was absent. Westmere, the Dowager said, and the single word held command, warning, and maternal outrage. We were beginning. So I heard, Adrian said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The room knew who owned its roof. Rosamund looked at Verity with an expression of delicate astonishment. Miss Hale. I had understood you had left us. Verity took one step forward. Her returned glove was on her right hand, the mended seam visible against the grey-blue of her gown. I did. And yet here you are. Rosamund's smile softened for the room. The Hounds had brought their little keeper back. A few guests shifted. No one laughed. The insult was too pretty to be called vulgar, and too ugly to be mistaken for wit. Verity felt the old impulse to shrink, to let the words pass over her so that no one would be made uncomfortable by her pain. She did not obey it. Then why were you in the kennel after midnight? Rosamund's smile did not vanish. It froze. I beg your pardon. You heard me, my lady. The Dowager's fan snapped shut. Miss Hale, this is not a room for impertinence. No, your grace, Verity said. That is why I have brought a question instead. A faint murmur passed through the guests. Adrian stood to Verity's left, near enough that every eye understood his position, yet he did not answer for her. The promise held. That steadied her more than his hand could have done. Rosamund looked at Adrian then, not with fear, but with appeal. Your grace, surely this cannot be permitted. I have endured enough humiliation over an animal's confusion. Then answer her, Adrian said. Rosamund's eyes flashed. I was not in the kennel after midnight. Verity turned slightly toward the terrace doors. Pritchard. The kennel master entered only as far as the threshold. He bowed, cap in hand, and his voice came low but clear. There was a lady near the east gate after luncheon yesterday. Blue riding habit. Ivory-handled crop. I did not see her face plain, and I will not swear what I did not see. How honest, Rosamund said lightly. How useless. Adrian's gaze moved to her. Useful enough when joined to other facts. He nodded to Mrs. Vale. The housekeeper stepped forward and placed 3 small objects on a side table the footman had cleared for the purpose. A folded paper containing the first blue thread. A second strip of blue wool from the hunting shed. The ivory chip from a crop handle, curved, polished, and unmistakably fine. The room leaned inward without moving. Rosamund stared at the ivory chip for a heartbeat too long. A broken ornament, she said. A scrap of cloth. How dramatic Briarford has become. And the glove? Verity asked. Rosamund turned back to her. Your glove has caused enough trouble already. It caused none. It was taken from my room. You cannot prove that. Not alone. The last word carried farther than she expected. It seemed to touch every woman in the room who had ever understood what it meant to be disbelieved because disbelief was convenient. Adrian turned toward the open door. Bring Bracken forward to the terrace threshold. Rosamund gave a sharp breath. You cannot mean to parade that creature before guests. He will not enter unless he wishes to. Bracken came into view beside Pritchard, calm until Rosamund shifted. Her hand moved toward the ribbon at her shoulder, perhaps by instinct, perhaps to steady herself. The Hound's head lifted. A low sound formed in his chest. Not wild. Not theatrical. A memory with teeth. The room went utterly still. Pritchard murmured to him, and Bracken quieted when Verity lifted her gloved hand. He did not come to her. He only lowered his head and breathed. The contrast did what speeches could not. Rosamund's face whitened under the candlelight. This is absurd. You would have a dog judge me. No, Verity said. I would have people stop ignoring what he has been telling them. The words hung there. Adrian looked at her, and something in his face changed before he controlled it. Pride, perhaps. Regret. Something warmer and more painful than either. The Dowager stepped forward. Enough. I will not have a guest of this house shamed by insinuation. Lady Rosamund is the daughter of the Earl of Penley, and Miss Hale is a dependent companion who has been overindulged by a morning's accident. Mother, Adrian said. The word was quiet, but the room heard the warning inside it. No one in this house will be ruined because rank finds truth inconvenient. Her Grace turned on him. You are prepared to insult an earl's daughter for a woman who admits she handled your hounds in secret. Verity felt the blow, but this time it did not knock her backward. I handled one wounded hound in the open air because no one else had heard him. The Dowager looked at her as though hearing her properly for the first time and disliking the effort. Rosamund gave a small, trembling laugh. You see what she does, Your Grace? She makes herself noble by making others cruel. It is a very clever kind of poverty. A whisper moved through the room. Verity's hand closed once within the glove. She could feel the old stitching against her palm. She thought of Annie. Thomas. Bracken at the gate. Adrian asking at last in the correct way. She lifted her chin. My poverty has made me careful, my lady. It has not made me false. Rosamund's smile sharpened again. Then why did your glove smell of salve before the hounds came to you? Why did the pack know you? Why did you leave if you were so innocent? Because I was tired of being tried in rooms where I had not been allowed to speak. The room fell silent. Not curious now. Struck. Adrian turned toward the side door. Mrs. Vale asked the first witness to come forward. The word witness rippled through the guests. Not legal. Not theatrical. Moral. Mrs. Vale opened the side door. Annie stood there in her plain maid's dress, trembling so visibly that several ladies looked away from shame before she spoke. Verity's heart moved toward her at once. Adrian's voice softened, but remained clear. You are safe to speak only what you know. Annie looked at Verity, then at Lady Rosamund, whose expression had become dangerously still. The maid swallowed. Her hands twisted once in her apron. Then she raised her head enough for her voice to cross the room. I saw Lady Rosamund take Miss Hale's glove. Annie's words did not merely enter the great drawing room. They changed its air. Every candle seemed to burn more sharply after them, showing too much of every face. Lady Rosamund Eversley stood with one hand against the ribbon at her shoulder, her expression held in place by will alone. Her Grace Octavia Vale looked not at the maid, but at her son, as if the greater breach had been that he had allowed truth to speak from so low a station. Verity remained still. The urge to move toward Annie was strong, almost painful, but she understood that one step taken too quickly might make the girl appear coached, sheltered, or claimed. So she did the harder thing. She trusted Annie to stand. Adrian's voice crossed the room, even and controlled. You saw Lady Rosamund take Miss Hale's glove. Annie swallowed. Yes, Your Grace. From where? Miss Hale's room. It was on the washstand. Lady Rosamund told me to bring her vinaigrette, and when I came back, the glove was in her hand. Rosamund laughed once. The sound was bright, wrong, and too thin. A servant girl who fears dismissal will say anything when a duke asks it. Annie flinched, but did not retreat. I didn't say it because His Grace asked. I said it because Miss Hale told me not to steal it back. She said if we touched it in secret, you would call us thieves before you called yourself false. A movement passed through the guests, not laughter, not outrage, but recognition. The kind of sentence that had not been invented in panic carried a weight of its own. Rosamund's face hardened. This is grotesque. Adrian turned to Mrs. Vale. Thomas. The young footman came in from the side door as if each step cost him a year of life. He bowed so low that his shoulders shook. Verity felt the ache of his fear in her own bones. Adrian did not soften the moment by pretending it was easy. Speak only what you know. Thomas nodded. I saw Lady Rosamund by the kennel gate yesterday after luncheon, Your Grace. She had her crop. Bracken came near her skirt, and she grew angry when mud marked the hem. She struck at him to drive him back. Not to injure him badly, perhaps, but enough that he cried out. She saw me near the tack room after. She said if I spoke, she'd say I had left the gate loose and endangered the pack. Rosamund's cheeks flushed. A boy's confusion. A maid's hysteria. A companion's ambition. Must I be condemned by every frightened creature at Briarford? No, Verity said. Her voice surprised even her. It was quiet, but it reached the corners of the room. You are not condemned by their fear. You are revealed by what you did with it. Rosamund swung toward her. You sanctimonious little fool. You think one hound's affection makes you noble. No, Verity said. I think cruelty remains cruelty, even when silk covers the hand that commits it. The room went silent again. The dowager's face tightened, but Adrian spoke before she could. Lady Rosamund, did you take Miss Hale's glove? No, did you use it against your crop handle to place its scent there? Of course not. Did you damage your crop yesterday? I do not inspect every ornament I own. Adrian lifted the ivory chip from the table. This was found in the old hunting shed. Pritchard found the matching blue thread near the kennel gate. Mrs. Vale recovered the glove beneath the lining of the ribbon box in your chamber, witnessed by 2 members of the household. You may deny each object alone. You cannot deny the pattern without insulting the intelligence of every person in this room. Rosamund turned to the dowager. Your Grace, surely you will not allow this. For one suspended breath, Verity thought her Grace might still do it. The older woman's pride was vast enough to shelter many lies, and her fear of public humiliation had built walls around her conscience. But then Bracken moved at the terrace threshold. Rosamund, agitated, reached toward the ribbon at her shoulder and brushed the blue silk. The hound gave a low, pained rumble. It was not savage. It was memory. Rosamund recoiled, and the gesture broke the last thread of her performance. It was one animal, she snapped. One filthy, ill-mannered beast that ruined my skirt. I only meant to put it back. Anyone would have done the same if they had been made ridiculous in a yard full of servants. The words fell into the room and could not be gathered back. There was no gasp this time. There was something worse. Stillness. The kind that follows when every excuse has removed its mask. Verity looked at Bracken, who had lowered his head beside Pritchard's leg. She did not feel triumph. She felt sorrow for every creature, human or not, who had ever learned to be quiet around someone beautiful and cruel. Adrian's voice was colder than the marble hearth. Lady Rosamund Eversley, you are no longer welcome at Briarford Park. Rosamund's mouth opened. Nothing came. Your father will be informed before morning, Adrian continued. He will also be informed that the stable boy you threatened and the maid whose honesty you endangered will receive full protection from this house. Any attempt to damage their character will be answered by me directly. Rosamund turned pale. That, more than exposure, frightened her. Consequence had finally entered the room dressed in a duke's authority. The dowager stepped forward. Westmere. Adrian turned to her. The sun vanished. The duke remained. No, mother. Not this time. Her Grace drew herself up, but the diamonds at her throat trembled faintly. You would disgrace an earl's daughter before guests. She disgraced herself. We disgraced this house by nearly letting rank hide it. His gaze moved to Verity, then back to his mother. You chose a duchess who could perform kindness. You skipped the only woman in this room who lived it when no one was meant to see. The dowager's face blanched as though the words had found a private wound. The guests did not move. Verity could not breathe properly. Not because she had been praised, but because he had named the truth without making it a favor. Adrian faced the room. Miss Hale was accused under my roof. She was doubted under my roof. She was allowed to leave this morning when I should have understood that sending an innocent woman away is not protection. It is abandonment dressed as courtesy. For that, I am accountable. Verity's eyes burned, and she hated them for it. The apology was not loud. It was not sentimental. It was better. It cost him something. Her Grace Octavia Vale looked at Verity then, fully, without the dismissive glance she had used all week. Pride fought in her face. So did shame. At last, she inclined her head. Miss Hale, I withdrew judgment where I should have offered protection. I permitted my wishes for this house to blind me to what was done inside it. Lady Rosamund will not be presented here tonight or ever. I shall make that clear to every guest present. The apology was stiff. It was imperfect. It was public. Verity accepted it with a curtsy that did not bend too low. Thank you, Your Grace. Rosamund gave a small sound, half disbelief, half fury, but no one moved toward her. The very society she had trusted to protect her had stepped back from the stain she had made. Adrian signalled to Mrs. Vale, and Lady Rosamund was escorted from the room with all due formality and none of the admiration with which she had entered it. Only after the doors closed did the hound stir beyond the terrace. Pritchard looked to Adrian for permission. Adrian nodded. The terrace doors were opened wider, and Bracken stepped to the threshold. The pack remained behind him, held by the grooms, restless but controlled. Verity turned before she meant to. Bracken came directly to her. He pressed his head beneath her mended glove, then folded himself at her feet. One by one, the other hounds settled beyond the terrace stones, facing her in quiet trust. No applause came. None was needed. The silence had become reverence. Adrian stood beside Verity, not before her. They were not mistaken, he said, his voice low enough for her and clear enough for the room. We were. Verity looked down at Bracken, then at the glove that had been stolen, accused, and returned. They remembered kindness, she said. That is all. Adrian's eyes held hers. Then let the rest of us learn from them. He bowed, not as a duke granting favor to a dependent woman, but as a man placing his pride at her feet with restraint. Miss Hale, I will not ask you for an answer tonight that belongs to time and trust. But if you will permit it, I would be honored to court you properly. The room seemed to vanish and return in the space of one breath. Verity felt every eye upon her, but for the first time the gaze of society did not decide the shape of her heart. She had been chosen by a hound, defended by truth, and seen at last by a man powerful enough to command the room and wise enough not to command her. You may court me, she said, her voice steady, as Miss Verity Hale. Not as a replacement for anyone. Adrian's answer came at once. There is no replacement for you. Bracken sighed against her skirt, as if even the hound understood that the house had finally heard what he had tried to tell them from the beginning. By the end of that season, London had told the story so many times that it had polished away the shame of having believed the wrong version first. In Mayfair drawing rooms, ladies who had lowered their eyes while Verity Hale was accused now spoke warmly of her composure. Gentlemen who had murmured about a companion's ambition now praised His Grace Adrian Vale for discernment. Even the word scandal changed shape as it travelled. What had begun as Miss Hale's disgrace became Lady Rosamund Eversley's unfortunate temper, then her dangerous falsehood, and finally a cautionary tale about mistaking breeding for character. Verity listened to very little of it. She had spent too many years outside the circle of public approval to trust its warmth simply because it had turned in her direction. She remained for several weeks with Mrs. Fenwick at the cottage, not because Briarford was closed to her, but because she needed to learn the difference between being invited and being claimed. Adrian understood. That, more than any flowers he sent, persuaded her. He did not arrive unannounced at improper hours. He sent calling cards. He came in the afternoons with Mrs. Fenwick present, and he sat in the small parlour beneath the low ceiling as if a duke might learn something from a room too modest to flatter him. He brought no jewels. He brought books she had once mentioned, news of Bracken's improvement, and the names of every servant protected after speaking the truth. Thomas had been moved to the stables, where Pritchard said the boy had a steadier hand with horses than with soup plates. Annie had been offered a place under Mrs. Vale's direct supervision, where no visiting lady could threaten her character again. The Earl of Penley had arrived at Briarford within 2 days of the exposure, grey-faced and furious, not at first from remorse, but from the public inconvenience of having a daughter returned to him in disgrace. Adrian had met him in the estate office with the door open and the steward present. By nightfall, compensation had been promised to the kennel staff, a written character had been secured for Thomas, and Lady Rosamund had been withdrawn from the season under the excuse of delicate nerves. Society understood the excuse. Society also understood the truth beneath it, which was the only language it truly respected. Her Grace Octavia Vale was slower to change. Pride did not leave her in a dramatic collapse. It retreated by inches. She called at Mrs. Fenwick's cottage one afternoon in a carriage too grand for the narrow lane, entered the small parlor with her spine straight, and looked for a long moment at Verity without the old dismissive glance. "Miss Hale," she said, "I owe you an apology not arranged for witnesses." Verity set down her tea. "Your Grace already apologized in public. Public apology corrects public injury. It does not always confess private blindness." Mrs. Fenwick sat very still by the hearth, pretending to mend a stocking that had no need of mending. The dowager's gloved hands tightened once in her lap. "I wanted a duchess who would strengthen the house. I forgot to ask whether the house deserved strengthening if it required cruelty to preserve its appearance." Verity received the words carefully. An apology from a proud woman was not a bouquet. It was a stone lifted from a road, heavy and awkward, but real. "I cannot pretend it did not wound me," she said. "I would think less of you if you did." The dowager drew a breath. "If my son continues to court you, it will not be because I have permitted him. It will be because you permit him. I shall not make the same mistake twice." Verity looked at the older woman then and saw, perhaps for the first time, not merely a dowager duchess guarding a house, but a mother terrified of seeing that house become hollow. "Then we may begin again," Verity said. Her Grace inclined her head. "Slowly." "Slowly," Verity agreed. Adrian asked for her hand 2 months later, not beneath chandeliers, not before witnesses, and not because a room expected an answer. He asked in the kennel courtyard at Briarford, where summer had turned the stones warm and the hounds lay drowsing in the sun. Bracken had healed, though a faint mark remained under his coat, visible only when the fur parted at a certain angle. Verity knelt to scratch his dark ear while Adrian stood beside her with his hat in his hands, looking for once like a man less certain of command than of desire. "I have tried to court you as Miss Verity Hale," he said. "Not as a woman wronged under my roof. Not as the answer to my mother's error. Not as the person my hounds found wise before I did." Verity rose, brushing dust from her skirt. "And have you succeeded?" "Not entirely. I still think of the morning you left whenever I see the East Road. That is not failure. It feels like instruction." She smiled a little. "Then perhaps you have learned something." He stepped no closer until she lifted her eyes fully to his. "I have learned that protection without listening can become another form of command. I have learned that a house is not honored by the rank of the woman who enters it, but by whether she may speak truth once inside. I have learned that I love you without wishing to make you smaller so I may be useful." Her breath caught, and for once she did not hide it quickly enough. His voice lowered. "Verity, will you marry me?" Bracken sighed loudly at her feet, as if the question had interrupted his rest. She looked down and laughed, not prettily, not politely, but with a happiness that startled her by being so unafraid. Then she looked back at Adrian. "Yes," she said. "But I won't be managed into becoming ornamental." "Good," he said. "I have never known you to suit ornament." The wedding took place in the parish chapel near Briarford, where the stone floor held generations of veiled footsteps and the windows looked out toward the fields rather than London's approval. Verity wore ivory silk because the dowager insisted a Duchess of Westmere must not be married in grey, but the gown was plain enough that Verity could breathe in it. Mrs. Fenwick wept without apology. Mrs. Vale stood near the back with Annie beside her. Pritchard waited outside with Bracken and 3 of the calmer hounds, because even her Grace had conceded that some traditions improved when honesty entered them. Lady Rosamund did not attend. Her absence made no wound in a day. Her name had become something spoken less and less often, as all punishments rooted in vanity eventually become silence. After the vows, Verity stepped from the chapel as the new Duchess of Westmere. The title felt strange, not heavy exactly, but large enough to require walking into it one day at a time. Adrian offered his arm. She took it. The guests watched, but their watching no longer decided her worth. At Briarford Park, the first place Adrian brought her was not the great drawing room. It was the kennels. The courtyard had been swept, the gates freshly painted, and beside the entrance, mounted in a simple glass case with a silver plate beneath it, lay the mended doeskin glove. Verity stopped. For a moment, she could not speak. The glove looked even poorer behind glass. The stitches were visible. The thumb was worn. The old seam crossed the palm like a scar that had decided to remain useful. The silver plate read, "For the hand that chose mercy first." Adrian, she whispered. It's only a glove. No, he said. It is the first honest thing this house recognized. She turned toward him, and the courtyard blurred before she could command it clear. You make it sound grand. It was not grand. That is why it mattered. Behind them, Bracken came forward with the solemn importance of a creature who believed all ceremonies required his approval. He pressed his head beneath Verity's hand, then settled at her feet. One by one, the other hounds lowered themselves around her skirts. No one laughed this time. No one whispered that she had stepped beyond her place. Her Grace Octavia watched from the archway, proud, humbled, and silent in the right way at last. Adrian stood beside Verity, not before her, not behind her, his shoulder near enough to promise companionship and far enough to honor choice. Verity looked across the courtyard, past the hounds, past the repaired gates, toward the fields where mist lifted from Briarford land in pale ribbons of morning light. She had once entered this house as a woman placed beside another woman's future. Now she stood at its heart, not because she had been made dazzling, but because she had been believed. The hounds rested around her as if the matter had been settled long before the humans understood it. Verity laid her mended hand on Bracken's head and smiled. A house, she thought, could be taught. So could a duke. So could a woman who had mistaken invisibility for safety. And under the warm Yorkshire sun, with mercy preserved behind glass and love standing quietly at her side, the Duchess of Westmere finally felt seen without having to ask.